There are a lot of roguelikes, roguelites, action roguelikes, and more roguelikes that come out all the time. It's a very accessible genre, but that also means that there are a lot of games that just aren't worth your time to wade through. Now, I certainly can't highlight all of the games, but I will try to highlight notable releases. Opinions on these games are merely my own, and if you disagree, well, that's just fine. It's okay to have an opinion and to express that opinion. It doesn't make anybody right or wrong. We're going to go through a few games, and I'm going to leave some ratings. For these ratings, I'm going to leave you with the following. A game will be an all-star, a must-play, worth considering, just meh or don't touch. Again, my ratings might differ from yours, but for this episode, we're going to be going back a few months to note the full game releases during that time. I'm not covering early access games for reasons that I won't cover here. I'm not going to be covering early access games. But without further ado, let's check out the first game here of the last few months. West of the Dead can be thought of as a cross between a twin-stick shooter with real-time tactics-based coverage and strategy, all mixed with a healthy dose of Dead Cells progression. Now that's a mouthful for sure, and if it sounds ambitious to try and mix all of that together, you'd be right. This is a lot to mix together in one game, and I'm not entirely convinced it was successfully mixed together either. West of the Dead was developed by Upstream Arcade and was published by Raw Fury. It was released mid-June of 2020 and can be picked up nearly everywhere, including PC, Xbox One, PS4, and Switch. The game is set in a Western style, apparently 1888 in Wyoming, in Purgatory. You start the tutorial level by dying, and the rest of the game you spend trying to pass through Purgatory, which is overrun by ruffians and monsters for some reason or another. These are all trying to kill you. Again. The artwork is very cool, and frankly, I love it. It's Purgatory in the Wild West, and the game design absolutely nails it. Combat-wise, you fight room to room and duck strategically behind cover, shoot at enemies, and dodge incoming shots and melee attacks. Now, on paper this sounds amazing, and the trailer for the game certainly shows this off well. It looks like Dead Cells with guns in the 3D space. In-game though, the game feels anything but the fluidity of Dead Cells. The game moves between slow-mo and full speed depending on if you are ducking behind a table, or dodging a bullet, or just moving around a room. While this is a great mechanic, it's hard to figure out why things are slowing down or when it would even happen. It just ends up feeling like you are having input lag because you can't predict when it will be moving between real-time and slow motion. Also, the cover that you can duck behind to prevent incoming shots, while convenient, makes moving around a room difficult. A lot of the strategy of the game is figuring out when to duck behind a table, when to rush an enemy as they reload, etc. But if you rush an enemy and pass by a place to shelter, you will get sucked into it and forced to crouch behind it, and your forward momentum will be slowed. And sadly, this isn't the only issue. Another piece that started to get old fast was a music cue that it's supposedly to signal the end of a combat phase. This guitar riff, while it in and of itself fits quite nicely, tends to play when a room isn't even cleared, giving you sometimes a sense of security, allowing an enemy to get a free shot. Or it will just not play at all, and you'll stealth around a room and that you could otherwise just move freely. Now, even if it was consistent, we're talking about hearing this guitar riff once every minute or two while in game. It's about the same experience you have the first time you pick up the rad gun and enter the gungeon. It's great and even funny at first, but you quickly wish it would just stop. Overall, the main issue is just the lack of fluid combat mechanics. This has the potential to be a great game, but I just walked away frustrated with what felt like constantly eaten inputs or massive frame lag. But that was just how the game was designed to run. Now, I'll be keeping my eye on it. Every issue with the game that I have right now can be fixed, and I'm used to seeing this in an early access game, but there's still hope that future versions will adjust and fix the combat mechanics' lack of fluidity. However, even then, I have my doubts, mainly because there's already a paid DLC that's been released. This normally signals that the developer knew there were improvements that could be made to the game, but chose instead to screw people who purchased the game early instead of working on fixing or enhancing the primary game. I have no issues with a quick DLC, but choosing to charge for additional content this fast when there are things in the base game that aren't balanced or need to be fixed, well, that just shows more of a devotion to driving profits than developing a good game. All in all, this solidly lands West of the Dead in the just meh category, as one I really wouldn't recommend. I'd really like to like this game, I really would, but the poor execution and early paid DLC just are too much to overlook. Next up is Neon Abyss. Take a sprinkling of Binding of Isaac style unlocks and items, shove that into a 1980s aesthetic neon, and put it into a 2D platformer, suddenly you've got quite the game going for you. Neon Abyss was developed by VWoo Games and published by Team 17. This game has been out for a couple of months now, having a full release on July 14th of 2020 on Steam, Switch, PS4, and Xbox One. Neon Abyss definitely takes its cues from The Binding of Isaac, taking the best cues from the game, including hidden rooms, item synergies, challenge rooms, progressively difficult bosses, and devil deals and angel rooms. Add this to a massive arsenal of weaponry, and you've got a run-and-gun platformer that brings the variety and replayability we're all hoping for in an Isaac-like. The only real miss from the game is the music. While there isn't anything wrong with the music it has, it's just limited. It is the same soundtrack from room to room and level to level. It starts to get repetitive. For a game with this graphic aesthetic, it's just missing the audio side of things. But other than that, the gameplay is fun. There are lots of ways to get a broken build to do lots of damage to the enemies fast. It's still a challenging game with increasing difficulty and lots of ways to die though at the same time. The game has undergone a lot of balancing since release, with a couple of the early builds still feeling like an early access game, but it's definitely a complete game, with the developers being very involved in the community of fans. Overall, I'd say pick up Neon Abyss. It's a fun playthrough that will challenge you, but isn't so complicated that you won't be able to figure out what's going on. As such, I drop it solidly into the worth considering bucket. You just might want to put on your own music after a while. Our third game chronologically is a delve into the ever-expanding deck builder genre of roguelites. Meteorfall Krumit's Tale is a unique take on the deck builder style, but definitely focused on the limited control schemes you would need to be more mobile friendly. While this is certainly a fun game on computer, you can pick up Krumit's Tale on Android or iOS as well. This game was developed and published by Slothworks on July 22nd, 2020. It's the second Meteorfall game, the first one also being a deck builder. Your cards are in the form of tiles that get shuffled in with enemies that you choose to fight. You have to clear all the enemies that show up on your board before you can move to the next area. It's part a strategy of figuring out who to fight and when, but also which items to pick up and when, as you're limited to a total of 4 weapons, spells, or armor at any one given time. The weapons and armor that you pick up have durability, so that each time they are used, they wear down. This combined with the items which you pick up means that there really isn't a single path to victory. Depending on which items you pick up, you might abandon your initial strategy and go with something completely different. Between dungeons, you get additional cards or tiles that you can, at will, add or remove to your deck. This makes it incredibly easy to change tactics mid-run, which is something you would never have been able to do with Slay the Spire or any of the Spire clones that are out there. Now granted, running a lean deck actually isn't very beneficial to you, as you can choose to recycle tiles you don't need for health. But you do have a lot more flexibility to try out different strategies, which just isn't there in most deck builders without restarting your entire run. This is a delightfully charming game that would be essentially inviting for touchscreen devices. Still enough depth and complexity from run to run though. I'll drop this squarely into the worth considering category, especially if you're looking for a good deck builder roguelike on the go. Our last two games spent a little bit of time in early access prior to their full releases recently. The first is UnderMine, which was developed and published by Thorium, released on August of 2020. It spent just over a full year in early access. UnderMine has the unfortunate inverted progression mechanic found in Rogue Legacy that I talked about in my Why We Play Roguelikes video. It's not as holistic as that implementation, but things like your health and strength do scale with permanent upgrades that takes a bit of grinding to get to a stronger build. Your main weapon in the game is a pickaxe, which you can use to hack, but also throw like a boomerang, which magically comes back to you somehow? I don't know. You pick up items, look for hidden rooms, basically another game taking its marching orders from The Binding of Isaac. But a big difference. You can jump. And you can also fall into pits, which is frankly one of the most annoying parts of the game, or any game I played recently. It's really hard to see where you are, especially when you're jumping relative to these pits, so you end up in the pits a lot more than you think you would be. And even once you get used to that, you fight, well, a really small pool of enemies. There just isn't enough variety from run to run, and you're going to be doing a lot of runs because you have to grind to get your character's HP and strength up. As I've mentioned in my previous videos, I'm not a fan of this type of character progression. It tends to ruin some games which have real potential. Unless your game is really compelling with lots of reasons to replay and keep coming back, it limits your ability to want to keep going for just another run. The artwork, though, is charming, and it otherwise does a great job with its item and curse system, which provides some level of risk-reward during a game, which is really interesting. But I just don't know if it's going to be worth dumping time into the game, especially if, at the end of the game, you're going to wonder whether you've gotten better at the game or you've just leveled up your character stats high enough. Still, I do know that some people really enjoy this style of roguelite progression, so if that's you, this is a solid game in the genre to pick up. For my tastes, though, the replayability is just a little too lacking for me to say it's a must-play. Again, this wouldn't be something you'd regret, especially if you're looking for a Rogue Legacy-like game that isn't Rogue Legacy 2. But again, since this is my rating and it's not really my cup of tea, I'm going to put this one squarely into the just meh category rating. Our final game we're looking at is a sequel to a very successful roguelike platformer. But this specific game isn't a platformer. I mean, don't you think the best sequel to your successful 2D platformer is to make a third-person shooter? I'm talking, of course, about Risk of Rain 2. Even though the style of game is completely different, this is definitely Risk of Rain. For those of you unfamiliar with the original, Risk of Rain was a brutal platformer shoot-'em-up where the more time you spent in a level, the harder it gets. But you need to spend time in a level getting money and buying upgrades, or the portal and boss at the end of each level will be too hard to beat. The classic case of take all the time you want, but hurry up, you gotta get going. Risk of Rain 2 was developed by Hoppo Games and published by Gearbox. It entered early access in March of 2019 and was released on August 11th of 2020. You can pick it up pretty much anywhere on Steam, PS4, Xbox One, and the Switch. There really isn't any preamble to this game, which I particularly enjoy, as someone who has a notoriously short attention span and doesn't like dialogue. You just crash onto whatever planet you're on and pop out of your capsule. Enemies start showing up in waves and you start killing them. And the waves never, ever stop. They just keep coming. Now I'm terrible at this game. Third-person shooters just aren't my style, but I do love it. The only way I've been able to progress past the first level is to toss this into easy mode. I did make it to the final boss doing that, which I won't show you for spoiler's sake. I got him to halfway dead before he one-shotted me, kind of disappointing, but that's how it goes. But like any good roguelike, you buy and pick up items along the way which drop or are available randomly, and they give you stats boosts or abilities. It's not only the quest to get better at the game and figuring out a good strategy for when to activate the portal and how long is too long on a level, but it's also the quest for finding the most stupidly broken build. Once you do start tossing rockets or having a badass beetle fighting along you, it gets pretty cool and keeps you wanting to come back for one more. Now also, the soundtrack is outstanding. It's straight up rock and roll. Forget the synthwave or chiptunes. This is a lit soundtrack, and one that I actually have picked up separately aside apart from the game. Probably one place this game shines the most is that it was built with multiplayer in mind as the primary way to play the game. This isn't some tacked-on multiplayer, it's best experienced playing together. Now, I'm not usually one to play a game with other people. As you can see, my footage recording here is just me by myself because, well, that's how I roll when it's game time. But it is a blast with friends. If you're looking for a roguelite to just flat out enjoy with friends, then this is the game you should absolutely pick up. And yes, it's online multiplayer, perfect for 2020. As you play the game, you will unlock other characters which all give you different playstyles and weapons, which then synergize differently with the items that will drop. I just can't speak highly enough of this game. It has so much potential and is very, very well executed. Due to all of this and more, this game definitely lands into the must-play category. I'd highly recommend picking it up, even if you're like me and you tend to just play things solo. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode, looking back at notable roguelikes and roguelites released recently. I hope you found this insightful, and maybe you found one or two games you actually want to pick up. Or maybe you found one you want to save your money on and maybe buy one next month. These episodes are going to come out monthly, so I'll be able to have a bit tighter focus on these episodes moving forward. But if there's one you think I've missed that I should have highlighted, please do let me know in the comments. There's no reason why I can't go back and overlap months after all. Thanks for watching the video, and thank you to everyone who has subscribed. You are helping my little channel to grow, and I wouldn't be doing this without you. Also, if you're looking to keep the conversation going, you're welcome to join my roguelike community Discord, Rogue HQ. The link, as they always say, is in the description. But thanks again for stopping by. We'll see you later, and take care until next time.